We're joined today by Mike O'Brien, Democratic candidate for the 10th Congressional District. Why are you seeking this office?
So for me, my why goes back to 2015. As you probably know, I was a Top Gun F-35 pilot in the Marine Corps. So at the height of my career, my best friend in the Marine Corps, his name was Major Taj Serene. He was over there fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria for 6 months. And on his way back through, he was flying through the UK, and his navigation system, his heads-up display, pointed him towards the ground, and he didn't recognize it. And unfortunately, he crashed and lost his life. And for me, I lost a best friend at that point. I was 34, had a 1-year-old daughter. He was 34, had a 1-year-old daughter as well. And it forced me to kind of reevaluate what I wanted to do in life. And ultimately, he was the type of person that we need here that brings people together from all walks of life, all races, religions, political persuasions. And when his gravestone went in a couple months later, it said, the last line on it, it reads, "In service for mankind." So I saw that and I made a pledge to, live that same legacy of service and togetherness and put myself where it was needed most. And after 2016, when Donald Trump got elected, the country just went in opposite directions with the negative partisanship and divisiveness. And it was very clear where it was needed most. And it was in American political leadership. So I made the decision really to enter the arena then. All of my academic background was engineering, but now I focused on politics and policy, learn as much as I can, not knowing when I would actually get involved. But the when became very clear to me in the aftermath of the 2020 elections. My wife and I, she's active duty still in the Marine Corps. We were stationed at the Pentagon at the time. So we saw the buildup, the MAGA hats, the Confederate flags, the American flags on the back of pickup trucks. And we also heard the threats that Donald Trump was going to use military force to overturn the results of the election. And that morning on January 6th, my daughter's school was closed. My wife had to go pick up my son from across the National Mall where he was in daycare. I was doing a military move by myself, driving across to San Diego, watching it all play out of the corner of my eye on a cell phone. And when I saw C-SPAN shut off and flip over to CNN and saw the Capitol get breached and saw the death and destruction that day, I was obviously amazed that that was what our country is coming to. So, 5 police officers died, 150 were injured, and still, after all that death and destruction, Scott Perry still tried to take away your vote, my vote, 6 million votes of Pennsylvanians. And so at that point, I made a pledge as soon as I could retire from the Marine Corps and do something about it and challenge him head on that I would, because I could no longer sit on the sidelines and watch Donald Trump and Scott Perry attempt to overthrow our democracy under the guise of patriotism. And it's time to step up and have somebody start a movement to reclaim freedom, to reclaim patriotism, and reclaim the American flag itself in the name of democracy.
Can you talk a little bit more in detail about your experience and how you would apply that experience if you're elected to Congress? Yeah,
absolutely. And over the course of my 20 years, I was fortunate enough to be involved in quite a bit. It wasn't just in the Marine Corps, you're not just a fighter pilot. You actually have plenty of other jobs. Yes, over the course of my career, I fought in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, flying off of aircraft carriers. I wrote war plans against China and North Korea. And topped it off, actually, the last job that I had, my wife and I, she's a C-130 pilot, we were the first married couple in the history of the Marine Corps to command squadrons. But at the same time, the military was really about people. It was about saving lives, improving lives, and building relationships. And so on the humanitarian side of the house, supported the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, also rescued a family of 8, literally one day before the deadly bombing in the fall of Kabul in 2021. And also, in my last job, recently leveraged my military experience to rescue another family of 5 that they have actually had to escape Afghanistan and move to Pakistan because they needed care for their daughter who was 5 years old that was dying of leukemia. And literally just last week, I helped them get their visa approved, and they flew into Phoenix International Airport and are now on a different path in life. So to me, that experience, that was all about servant leadership. Yes, it was about service, it was about leadership, but you combine that. It's about listening to people, it's about taking action. And as a commanding officer, my responsibility wasn't only related to warfighting. It was all about people. It was all about the mental health of my Marines, the physical health, childcare, legal issues, domestic disturbance issues. So everything that society has to deal with, I had to deal with as a leader within the Marine Corps that I'd now like to apply here and I call it in the real world, and ultimately, again, to improve lives and to save lives.
For the benefit of our statewide audience, what should our viewers know about the 10th Congressional District?
Yeah, so the 10th district, I think, is a kind of a microcosm of America itself, which is great. The boundaries, geographic boundaries, so it's Dauphin County, it's most of Cumberland, out past Carlisle, and it's York City into the north. And the breakdown in terms of demographics, like I said, it represents America. It's about 79% white, 11% black, 9% Hispanic, about 6% Asian, and so forth. And so I feel like if we find the formula here to ultimately bring people together and form a coalition here in the 10th district, we can scale that elsewhere in America, which is what we need. Because we just need to get away from the negative partisanship that we see out there. And we need to have leaders that are dedicated to bringing both sides together and listening to people. And so for me, it's not about Democrat versus Republican. It's about American versus un-American. And it's about ultimately bringing people back together, which we sorely need here.
How would you characterize the economy of the 10th district?
So I would say that there's a lot of untapped manufacturing potential that was once here that I believe that we can leverage for things like the green energy transition, for example. So I'd look to bring a lot of infrastructure projects specifically and green energy projects here towards the district. And it's something that, should I get the chance to go down to DC and be a part of, say, for example, the transportation or infrastructure, energy and commerce committees, like that is something that I think that this district it's our strength. So definitely look to leverage those strengths and leverage the workforce and leverage the union workforce especially to help bring family-sustaining jobs here.
How do you attract and incentivize businesses to develop here in this area of the state as opposed to some other region of the country?
Well, first we need a representative who is an advocate. Right now we have a representative who really is focused on obstruction and personal political gain as opposed to advocacy for the 10th district itself. And you hear a lot about Philly and Pittsburgh getting all the attention. Well, we need to bring some of that attention here, and the way you do that is with somebody with credibility who is vocal in support of the people of the 10th and leveraging again the advantage that we do have in terms of the manufacturing potential, also the growth of the service industry here, the growth of the health industry here. Those are huge things that we need to be talking about in Washington, and right now that's not happening.
Do you support a federal increase in the minimum wage?
Absolutely. I think that there are multiple economic initiatives that we need to put in place in order to fight against corporate greed and corporate profiteering. So the minimum wage is one of them. I will also say I'm staunchly pro-union. So we got the Teamsters as an endorsement. We got the SMART union. We got iron workers. But unions and collective bargaining, again, is the strongest tool that we have in a democracy to fight against corporate greed. And so I plan on being a staunch union supporter. I'll also say things like anti-monopoly, antitrust legislation. That is big to me as well. And I would top it off with a tax code, because I think the tax code, while somewhat progressive, needs to be even more so and focus on wealth, not work. What we value as Americans is work and work ethic. And so that's what we tax, but we don't tax wealth, which that doesn't take work. That's money sitting in a bank account that's just growing. So things like intergenerational transfer of wealth through the estate tax, that is something that I would look to increase, because right now you got to reach $11 million before that's even taxed. So I would also look at value-added taxes on luxury goods. And on the other side, on the other side of the equation, I would say we need to look at continuing the expansion of the child tax credit, and especially the child care tax credit. Because for me, I told you about my wife and I earlier, both Marine Corps commanding officers. The only reason why we got to do what we did and participate in the Marine Corps workforce was because of the child care opportunities. So I'm a fan of expanding the child care tax credit and also making that refundable.
I'd like to move on and talk about higher education. What would you support to make higher education more affordable?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I'll say there's a lot of efforts from the president, especially to kind of to do something about student loan debt. And so I am a fan of eliminating student loan debt up to a point where it makes sense, where it's affordable. So I'd say that's number one, because a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into their education, and on the backside of it, we're not necessarily seeing the results that we want, but we're still saddled with this loan debt, which is preventing us from buying houses, and which to me, that is how you generate wealth. It's kind of, again, real estate and how that's passed on from generation to generation. So I think we look at what happens when you graduate from college or when you decide to move along to something else, and how can we reduce that debt burden is number one. And then number two, reducing the cost of higher education, period, is important to me. Especially, we need to elevate community colleges and career and technical education centers, because there's other pathways out there to success and towards a middle class lifestyle. And I believe a large part of that is, again, apprenticeships and community colleges. And I've done some visits here in the district to the Carpenters Union, to the electrical workers as well. And they have a great program where you graduate high school, you're an apprentice for 4 years. But during that time, you're getting paid, you're accruing experience, accruing time towards retirement. And after those 4 years, you can buy a house. They literally can buy a house when some of their friends are sometimes living out of their parents' basement. So that's something that we can do and that we need to elevate. So I would absolutely put more federal funding towards apprenticeship programs as well.
On another topic, you note on your website that crime, in particular gun violence, needs to be a priority of all levels of government. What specific policies would you support to lessen the incidence of gun violence?
Yeah, great question. I think that everybody thinks that this discussion is a 1 or a 0 discussion between the left and the right, but there's a lot that we actually agree upon. And so one of those things that will specifically target gun violence and handgun violence is the federal ban on ghost guns. And so for me, we're seeing it, I know we're seeing an increased prevalence of the use of ghost guns, so that are 3D printed or come along in kits, especially in the inner cities, that we can put a stop to right now and at least make that illegal and take action against that, which those are weapons that are obviously unaccounted for. I think the other side of this is, I'll say, like the Marine Corps itself, we like to call ourselves the largest state-sponsored gun club in the world, right? And so, but we are responsible in terms of the utilization of weapons and safety, weapons safety. So as a commanding officer, whenever I would have a Marine that was having a mental health issue or some type of domestic disturbance issue, anything really, the first thing that I would do was sign a paper that was called Do Not Issue. So you make sure that weapons aren't in the hands of people that are a threat to themselves and others. And if we can do that in the Marine Corps, I think we can do that larger on a larger scale in society. So that's red flag laws is basically what that is. So I'm very big on red flag laws to make sure guns aren't in the wrong hands. And I think we are all on the same page with kind of increased violent history checks, background checks, of course, but that's really what it's about. It's a violent history. And so we can all agree on that, and I would look to move legislation that we can actually get across the finish line.
Since you brought up the issue of mental health, what specific initiatives would you support to help address the nation's mental health crisis?
Yeah, well, I can tell you for a fact right here in Cumberland County that we're underfunded by $3 million on the mental health side of the house. And so where that money needs to go, it's when I talk money, whether it's education or mental health, it's about human capital and people, and investing in people, investing in providers. But I also think there are specific locations that are in dire need of mental health, one of them being schools. And so we see a lot of this, and in a lot of the conversations I've had here, there's only 1 or 2 guidance counselors there that are even trained in mental health in schools, period. That to me is not good enough. As a commanding officer of largely 18 to 22-year-old Marines, I know that that was my main concern. It was the mental health of my Marines. And that is systemic representation of where America is at in terms of America's youth. And so we need to put that effort into schools, I think. Another place that we can talk about is prisons, and you bring up homelessness as well. Mental health is involved in every single one of these issues in recidivism rates. I think we need to put a lot more stress and emphasis on proper funding for mental health, and again, put that towards people themselves, which in my opinion, are the providers.
In the past, you've talked about healthcare cost burdens. How do you drive down the costs of both, perhaps more broadly, healthcare and prescription drugs? Yeah,
so opening up Medicare and prescription drugs to more negotiation, I think. I talked earlier about antitrust and anti-monopoly. Well, we know about Big Pharma and the stranglehold that they really have on the healthcare industry. And so that's what I'd say we need to focus on first. And there are multiple layers of what's wrong with our healthcare system, of course. But I think that's a good first step. Capping the price of prescription drugs outside of insulin, maybe. And we know that that's capped at $35. right now, but we need to look at other drugs for capping. And I'll tell you, I lived in Yuma, Arizona. This will probably come up, a border town, for 2.5 years, and in San Diego for 8 years. And what people would do in the wintertime, they would come down there and they would move to Arizona, and with a simple goal of going across the border to Mexico to get prescription drugs and to get medical care. Like, that is not the mark of a first world country that brands ourselves as the leader in things like medical care and multiple other aspects of today's society. So we need to really uphold our end of the bargain as far as that goes with the people of America and the people of Pennsylvania.
What are your views on abortion?
So to me, I'll tell you a story. As a commanding officer, the only people that are allowed to receive medical information about members of their squadron are the commanding officer and the doctor, my flight surgeon. And so there was one day where I had a Marine who was one of the most highly qualified Marines in my squadron. She didn't come to work because she was scared that she had to tell me and the doctor that she wanted to get an abortion. There were obviously reasons for that, but she didn't come in. And so I got on the phone with her and with my doctor in the room, and I talked to her about it. And I said, look, luckily the laws in California there enable you to make your own decision. But whatever you decide, whatever path you want to go down, I'm 100% in support of you. And I'll give you the support. If you don't want to come in, I'll get your back on this. And because I believe that abortion is a deeply personal issue that should be decided upon by a woman. And if she chooses, with her family, with her doctor, with her spiritual advisor in the room, but it's ultimately a woman's decision. And there's no room for the government and people like Scott Perry to be involved in that decision. So I'm staunchly in support of women's reproductive rights, not only in abortion, but also proper sexual and reproductive health care as well for family planning, because that's absolutely critical in my opinion.
Are Medicare and Social Security sustainable for future generations?
I think we need to make sure that they're sustainable and find a way to make them sustainable. And the last thing we need to do is take away somebody's hard-earned paycheck that they've contributed to over the course of their lifetime. So we need to find a way to do it ultimately. And I know that the Republicans are looking at options in terms of taking away some of that funding. And I will staunchly defend Medicare and Social Security for seniors. And ultimately, in addition to that, I'd say we need to find a way for seniors to be able to age in place as well. And so a lot are living off of retirement income, a fixed retirement income that doesn't reflect the rising inflation. So when there are opportunities to incorporate COLA into some of the calculations for retirement pay, I'd like to do that as well and support that from a federal level.
You talked about briefly living along a border town. Do you support any changes in immigration policy or how that policy is currently enforced? Yeah,
so I think that we need to secure the border, number one, and then have an adult discussion about legal immigration. Most of America, where we're at, is we are not okay with the amount of illegal immigration that's going on today. That's where I'm at. So by securing the border, what I mean, I know the Republicans talk about a border wall, but there's other options as well. Whatever option is most cost effective, that's what I'm a fan of, because we can't really have a discussion about legal immigration if we don't have our hands around the problem. So for legal immigration, I would want to continue to tie that to skill, workforce requirements, workforce needs is what I'll say, and then also family ties here, and so open up the asylum process. I'll tell you, that is something that I know firsthand is broken. I mentioned earlier that I helped a family of 8 Afghanis come here to America, and it worked for a year with the Customs and Immigration Service, with the National Visa Center, with the Department of State, and there's not enough bureaucratic capacity there to really get anything done and to move people over here to America quickly. And the only reason why we were able to rescue that family was because of the strength of the bond between Marines across the world. It can't come to that. We need to improve our immigration and asylum system and give it the bureaucratic capacity to be able to handle what people that legitimately have a need to flow here.
What do you see as the greatest threat to the United States?
The polarization, the political polarization that we're under. We take a look at, I don't want to make this direct comparison because it's apples and oranges to a point, but you look at Israel right now and what's going on there. I believe that a lack of democracy or movement in that direction kind of led to what's happening. And here in America, we can't let the same thing affect us, to where we see somebody pulled over on the side of the road and we look at their bumper plate before making a decision on whether or not to help them. We're stuck in our own bubbles, and we're taught to hate the other side. And ultimately, that leads to a significant amount of grievance politics and not a lot of togetherness. And so for me, I talked about the desire to live that legacy of service and togetherness. And the way you do that is you provide cross-cutting opportunities. So one of the things I saw in the Marine Corps was a different version of America than is talked about on Fox News. And it's where you have people from all walks of life, all races, religions, and political persuasions that all get together, and what they fight for, they fight and defend American values. And so, like, the question is, what are those American values, and can we bring that to American politics? I believe that answer is yes. And I believe that answer to what are American values, I mentioned earlier, but work ethic, equality of opportunity, freedom, patriotism, those are all things that I think we all agree on that aren't Democratic or Republican issues. Those are values, those are American values. And that's what we need to talk about a little more to fight through this polarization and to ultimately have leaders that are willing to talk to both sides, which we don't have that in Washington, and especially not here in the 10th District.
At the beginning of this year, there were, I believe, 8 candidates running for the Democratic nomination for this seat. How do you distinguish yourself amongst those?
Yeah, it's again, we got a lot of great candidates out there. I think in order to beat Scott Perry, you ultimately have to have the resume, resources, and personality or character traits to do so. So for me, my resume, what it does, and I mentioned a lot of it before, but it enables me to challenge him head on and to challenge him on the oath of office that I upheld and that I believe that he betrayed from a position of recency and credibility. He talks about freedom, patriotism, national service, and leadership. I'll be able to take those self-stated advantages of his, and turn them into disadvantages. On the resources side, we need to be able to build a coalition. There are a lot of factions that are around, obviously, but building a coalition is incredibly important to get this over the finish line. Not only on the fundraising side, where I have been able to outraise the other candidates, but especially on the endorsement side, where I have the union support that I mentioned earlier, most recently the Teamsters, with local respected names in Democratic politics like George Scott, who came the closest to beating Scott Perry in 2018, Justin Douglas, the new Dauphin County Commissioner, Tim Scott, the former mayor of Carlisle. And then when you branch out nationally, what I am able to do is work through a national network as well to, again, continue the fundraising, but also the endorsement side with Vote Vets, with New Politics, Serve America. Those are all organizations that are based on service and bipartisanship ultimately. And so that's something that I can bring to this race and to this district that I don't believe the other candidates can. And lastly, I'll say from the personality side, I'm a Marine. And what that means is I've been a serving leader for 20 years. But any goal that we set, we attack that goal aggressively with a bias for action. And it's all about helping people, ultimately. It's about fighting for my Marines. It's fighting for their families. It was fighting for America. And now I'm here to fight for you, the members of, or the citizens of Dauphin, Cumberland, and York counties. If
you were elected, what would your top priorities be?
So number one and number two, the ones and zeros for me are democracy and women's reproductive rights, honestly. So those are the top priorities. And you know, the women's reproductive rights don't come without proper democracy in the first place. So when I say that, I talk about expanding voting rights, so same-day registration, independent redistricting to fight against the gerrymandering that we see out there. So democracy-related issues and initiatives, number one. And you heard my stance there for women's reproductive rights. And then behind that, it's the economics. If we can take our arguments and go away from culture and identity and back towards economics, where they were when politics was, digestible. That's where I want to go and improve the lives of everyday Americans, everyday Pennsylvanians, so that they don't have to live paycheck to paycheck in the ways that I mentioned before, with tax codes, support of America's workers, working class, and then with anti-monopoly legislation. But we got to realize that economics, what's in play there, there's also an aspect of healthcare, of education itself, and of climate, and they all tie in with one another. And so that's where I would put my legislative energy, so to speak.
Can you talk a little bit about your thinking process of how you're developing policy positions and how you might attack those if you're elected? I know I've read about you forming organizations such as Educators for O'Brien. Who are you talking to, and how does that process work?
Yeah, and that was recently formed this week, and we're pretty proud of that. Former president of PSEA, Rich Askey, is helping me out quite a bit. But also I'll say, while I talk about my military history, my family is actually, they're educators. They're all Pennsylvania public school educators. So my wife and I, born and raised Pennsylvania public schools. Her parents both taught around here for over 35 years in Bermudian Springs and Hanover. And my mom's high school librarian, and my brother is currently a middle school math teacher. So I get a lot of my education policy formulation from my family, is what I'll say. And I'm staunchly in support of making sure that money that is designed for Pennsylvania public schools stays with Pennsylvania public schools. But what's really important there is also where and how that money is spent. And I think it's a lot of it, again, it goes back to human capital. It should be spent on people. And so that's the training of teachers. It's also support staff as well. I mentioned mental health, guidance counselors. That's incredibly important for me. So I would like to, the way that I form policy, whether it's education or otherwise, bring a coalition together of people who know what they're talking about. And I'm a Marine, right? So I know quite a bit about foreign policy and again, education from family, but I want to make sure that I surround myself with people that are the true experts. And so when I go into a meeting with some of those coalitions, I of course go in with an initial opinion, but to me, I'm always open to new ideas and constructive criticism as well. And I believe that's an incredibly important part of leadership itself in the political world and otherwise is humility. And humility to me is the ability to accept and apply constructive criticism. And that, I think, is what will set me apart as a leader now as I transition service from the military to the political side.
Why would you like voters to elect you as the Democratic nominee for the 10th Congressional District?
So I want to make sure that they have somebody who fights for them. This isn't about me. This is about you. This is ultimately about the voters. And so what I would do is focus on the 10th district, is bring infrastructure projects here in order to create family sustaining jobs. It's to fund the redevelopment projects in Harrisburg, York, and Carlisle that are needed to fight against urban blight and to redo a lot of our underground infrastructure here, such as plumbing. We need to fix the I-83 bridge. We need to make 81 safer, and we need to provide the supplemental funding that it's needed from the federal level for mental health, public safety, and again, especially Pennsylvania public schools. So I'm going to be able to do that for them, and to me, it's dedicating all of my time to supporting them, not to fighting political battles in Washington over culture wars.
Mike O'Brien is the Democratic candidate for the 10th Congressional District. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.